Hello, my name is Carol Sturton-Broad, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce one of my favorite people, Bonnie Fitzgerald. So, Bonnie is a dedicated mosaic artist and educator with decades of experience. Through her company, Maverick Mosaics, Bonnie offers immersive workshops, both in person and online, designed to inspire creativity and preserve the rich traditions of mosaic art. Believing that travel enriches us beyond measure, Bonnie leads international tours and workshops in Europe and Mexico. Since 2013, she has served as the exclusive instructor of contemporary mosaics at the Smithsonian Institution Studio Arts Department, where she combines her passion for teaching with a commitment to innovation in mosaic art. She co-founded the Make It Mosaics YouTube channel with fellow artist Kim Wozniak, where they share techniques and insights, attracting over 37,000 subscribers. In 2020, during the challenges of COVID-19, Bonnie sought community and became involved with Contemporary Mosaic Arts, CMA2, a thriving online community with over 1,500 members from around the world. Bonnie can always be reached at www.maverickmosaics.com. And take it away, Bonnie.
Thanks for having me. Um, I have a real fondness for the area because I grew up near where you're all sitting. I grew up in Horsham. So what I thought I would do is just dive right into this presentation that I have that's a bit about me, a bit about where I hope to go, where sometimes whatever. Let's just have some fun. The long and winding road. I'm going to start to unpack this a bit about who I am and why I do what I do. This portrait was one of the hardest things I ever did. And I did it with Carol Shelkin. That should be of no surprise to any of you because Carol's style and how she teaches is pretty popular. And it was so difficult for a bunch of reasons. And not Carol. Carol is one of the most incredible instructors that I've ever worked with. But when you have to look at yourself all the time, it gets painful. A good, bad, and indifferent from, gosh, that was a good haircut. No, it wasn't, to the stinking teeth I probably worked on for 2 weeks. It was a really, really interesting exercise and introspection. And I worked on this for ages. Any of you who have taken a workshop with Carol Shuck know that you're not going to finish during the workshop. So we'll just leave it at that. All righty. So a bit about me. I live in Northern Virginia. I live 15 miles from the White House. I've been married for 35 years to Ken on the left, who is the wind beneath my wings without a doubt because he supports like every crazy idea I ever have. It's really pretty wonderful. And on the right is my family. I have one daughter who's married, and my son-in-law is an active duty Marine, and I'm really lucky that they have been moved to Quantico. So I'm actually sitting in their guest room as I speak. And I just noticed I'm actually wearing the exact same shirt. Like, my wardrobe's not real expansive, I work at home a lot. Anyway, so I have two grandchildren, and they're the light of my life and keep me humble. All of you have grandchildren know how that works. So, like I said, I grew up in Horsham, right outside of Philadelphia. But when I was there, it was really pretty rural. It was really just the beginning of the suburbs. Now, whenever I go there, because I actually still have relatives there, it's mind-blowing to me just how developed it is in ways I never could have imagined because it's not a rural place at all anymore. And I am the product of factory workers. And my dad's a first generation immigrant and from Poland. And my mother, interestingly enough, was always working because I was the third child. And I think, quite frankly, they just really needed the income. And I think she liked the inspiration of going to work and the respect that she gained. Although, be clear, when she was working, like, she couldn't even get a credit card, right? That did not happen until 19, like late 60s. Anyway, she was small physically, and so she could crawl inside golf carts and she would do the electrical work inside of a local factory to where we lived. These are my brothers. Not quite sure what mom had in mind with that haircut for any of us. But being the youngest, and I had a bully brother and then an introverted brother and then me, things were just different as the young girl. So in my hometown and the culture that I grew up in, girls didn't go to college. Like my dad told me I couldn't go to college, which was really I was really pissed about because one of my brothers got to go to college because he didn't want to go to Vietnam. Girls got married and they made babies. Well, a couple things happened. So I got out of high school, and at the time, the Prudential Insurance Company had just moved to Horsham, and it was a huge employer. And that's where all the girls went to work who didn't have other plans. So I went to work there. And after a very short period of time, I came to realize something that every employee who worked there who had any kind of college, and I mean a semester at community college, they got paid more than me because I had a high school degree. Okay, so that's fine. So I meet these two women who have college educations, and I learn that. And one of them then introduced me to the concept of spring break. So even though I wasn't a college student, for 2 years I went to spring break in Florida with my college friends. Yeah, and what happened is that the universe intervened because I really came to like Florida. I loved being out of Philadelphia in the snow. And I just, one of my friends said, like, yeah, you just really need to get this college thing happening. So I went to the library when back in the day, that's how you found colleges. And I went to the Florida section and I just kind of randomly picked a couple and applied to them because at the time application fees were nominal. And the short story is after some gap years, I did find my way to a liberal arts college. I did not go to an art school. And of all things, I majored in monumental sculpture. That's not how I got there. I got there as a psychology major, but that lasted a day because as soon as I walked into the ceramic studio, it was overwhelming. And I just knew that the universe was intervening. The picture on the right was a sculpture I made my last year of college there. And on the left was the professor I studied most with. This was really the very first mosaic I ever noticed. And I noticed it was the cover of a coffee table book because growing up we didn't go to museums. I didn't know about Italy or the European tradition. That wasn't the heritage of my family. So when I saw this, I was really intrigued by it and really started to look at mosaics. But it was really that pre-Columbian era versus the European traditions. And it just so happened that mosaics were being made in my own backyard. That professor I was studying with during the summers was doing large-scale architectural projects. Many were sculptures, but also many were mosaics. And this is not a guy who went to Italy at all either. He learned from books and from study and had been a painter. So he had a really strong aesthetic. And the bottom line is he was using stained glass and Mexican small tea. But at the time, I didn't know it was Mexican small tea. I didn't even know what it was. I barely knew what stained glass was. This was the very first commission I ever had, and that professor helped me get it and for sure guided me through it. But it was for a local church in Sarasota, Florida. That's where the college was, in the Virgin of Guadalupe. And I was using Mexican small tea that he helped order. And it's still that same Mexican factory. Again, didn't know anything about it. So while I was in college, I was really doing that sculpture thing, and I started making these little characters. At the time, I called them clones, and I became really interested in children's animation. I really felt that that was a place I belonged. And so I was using these little characters to help tell stories so that I could maybe have a job because I was also realizing that artists don't make a living very easily. And I was really looking for a path. I had been in the workforce long enough to know that I had to be realistic about making a living. And I had a brother who lived in Hollywood and worked in Hollywood. And so the filmmaking thing started to make sense. And after college, my sister-in-law and brother invited me to come and live with their family in California, where I ended up being for 10 years. Not living with them for 10 years, obviously, but that's how I ended up in that neighborhood and never really returning to Philadelphia. And I did get to work. I worked in children's animation, but an interesting thing happened because of my personality. I got kicked upstairs pretty quickly. And so I really wanted to be in children's animation. I thought for the creative part, but I have really strong management skills. So I just became not just, I was a production manager and was learning things when animation was still made on film, on 35 millimeter film. So it was a very different world than it is now. All along, I kept making mosaics, right? So this was a gift that I actually made for my brother and sister-in-law when they built a house, and I made this out of stained glass in their garage. And to this day, it's still in my sister-in-law's house. So, I cut off some of my text there. So, the filmmaking and management skills really took care of me when I decided to move to the East Coast. I met my husband in Los Angeles. We were doing some volunteer work because that's just who we are. And when I came to Washington, D.C., he had a job. So I had a little while to find my place. And I got really lucky. And I was introduced to a man named George Stevens Jr. And his father, George Stevens Sr., was a very famous American filmmaker. George Stevens, along with Gregory Peck, founded the American Film Institute. And that's me and Gregory Peck on the right. And George Stevens also founded a television show called the Kennedy Center Honors. And for 12 years, I worked for George on these two shows. And they were freelance gigs, so that kind of really suited my personality. And I learned how to pay quarterly taxes very early on in my working career. But it was a pretty phenomenal experience. On the picture on the right is me with like the Russian men's choir. I mean, I met all kinds of interesting people. And it really opened my worldview to the performing arts. Again, my family, like, we didn't do that. We barely saw movies or went to restaurants. So I was working along and working along in television, and a couple of things started to happen. I realized between my personality of being a production manager, I was never going to really get to do the creative because the bosses found me more valuable in that role. The other thing that happened is the boss had children, and they kept getting the jobs that I wanted, and then it just wasn't going to happen. So I decided I really wanted to transition to some other artfulness. And I came across this book by Terry Tempest Williams. And it's still out there. And she said some really interesting things, like Mosaic celebrates the brokenness and the beauty of being brought together. So I got this book and I started thinking about it. She takes you to Ravenna in the beginning, to the mosaics in Rwanda. And I really started thinking about mosaics in a different way because I had done some. And anyway, the universe really intervened because somehow I got a notice, and this is when I had a Macintosh computer and the screen was like, 8 inches by 8 inches. An email came across or some notice that there was going to be a volunteer meeting for a upcoming conference with a group in Washington, D.C. And so I went to that meeting. And I came home from that meeting and I figured out and found out who the president was. And I called Susan Jeffries and said, yeah, you got nothing. You need a production manager. And the short story is I was the first person hired by SAMA to run a conference. And after that, Dawn Marie Zimmerman took over, had that the intention they were going to have her do that job anyway. But so for the Washington, D.C. conference, I actually was thrown into a situation where I didn't know any mosaic artist, but they had a really strong board and we made for a really great conference. Very quickly, I was asked to join the board. I did. I was on the board for several years. I met so many wonderful artists. I went to so many fabulous conferences. Those bossy girl management skills really served me well being a board member. And there's no doubt about it, SAMA changed my life. It changed the arc of where I was going to go. So very shortly after all of that was happening, I opened a school in Northern Virginia called Maverick Mosaics. And so on the left was some of my students. We made a sign and I rented a space. And over a 3-year period, I hosted 30 plus visiting artists, which was really a phenomenal experience. Because I hosted, like, one of my early artists was Shug Jones and Sherry Warner Hunter came. And so even if I wasn't taking the workshop, these people were staying at my home. We were having these wonderful conversations at my kitchen table, and I just learned a ton about a ton. So these are just some of the artists that came. The very, very first artist I did, and it was even before I had the space, was Alana Shafar, which any of you who know of Alana, she was a life-changing force for anybody who ever took a workshop with her. So again, these are just some of the people I worked with. And Alana So Alana brought to the party something that I had never really experienced before, and that was this idea of spontaneous mosaics and the emotion of mosaics and building things with unconventional materials. Alana made a lot of materials because she had been a ceramicist. So that really resonated with me because I had been in that ceramics department and that sculpture department myself. So just a few things because these people had such influence on me, and this is just a fraction. So Shug Jones, she introduced me to the idea of realism, and she's such a skilled artist. And I think the biggest lesson she ever got me to understand is to just look at shapes and to not get wrapped up in the larger composition. Just look at the shapes. And if you could master those shapes, those primary shapes, the rest of it will fall into place. So I find that a really valuable lesson. And so this was a piece that I made with her early on. Another piece I was quite tortured by, but I took that lesson to heart about just looking at the shapes. And then there was Carol. So Carol was pretty awesome, and we just had a thing because we were both from Philadelphia. And I probably had Carol down and probably listened to her workshops 5 times. And it took a really long time until she said, you're good to go. And it was because Carol's unconventional use of color and understanding of color is really phenomenal. I've never met anybody who does it like she does. And it was so hard for me to grasp this concept that it's just about dark, medium, and light. It's really that simple, but it's not. It's really so much more. So Carol just really spoke to me in ways that other artists had not. I was really becoming quite fond of working in stained glass. Stained glass is easily accessible to many of us in the United States. So Carol had a lot of important influences on me. And most importantly, not most importantly, but one of the other things she does is Carol introduced me to Sam Leonard, who owned Hacienda Mosaico in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, which I went to 13 times. Thank you, Carol. For that, I'll be forever indebted. We'll talk about that later. So again, Carol doesn't care so much about the color as about the dark, medium, and light concept. And so this was a piece that I made in one of my many workshops with her. And along the way on that path, I was asked to write 2 books actually for the same publisher. And when the second book was coming around, they started going through all of my photographs, and the publisher really wanted to use this photograph. And I was kind of uncomfortable about it because it's like you don't send a work you did in a workshop to an exhibit. But I think I even talked to Carol about it. It was like, okay, let's just do this. And I'm really grateful. People love this piece. I no longer own this piece. I gave it to a family friend who really loved it more than I did. So anyway, it was just kind of an interesting chapter that went on with Carol. My friend Laura Redlin taught me, yeah, just look at it like a painting. So Laura is a painter first and a mosaicist second, although now she only makes mosaics. And she taught me that once you think you're done a piece, it's okay to put it on an easel and step back and look at it. And if you don't like something, glue something on top, like manipulate it, change it in some way until you do like it. And that was a really eye-opening experience. Like, oh, wait a minute, I don't ever have to be fully satisfied with something. I can manipulate it and change it until I really love it or I don't own it anymore. And so this is a piece I made with Laura. This is Givernet. She has a really interesting approach to teaching the landscape. I don't want to let that out of the bag in case you ever take a workshop with her, but it's really fun and it's really liberating, this layering and gluing on top and using unconventional materials like shells and wire and things beyond glass. Kelly Knickerbocker was another really interesting person. I spent a lot of time with her at my kitchen table. Kelly's an extraordinary instructor, and she's always changing. And I have huge respect for that. I don't always love where she is with something, but I sure do love the fact that it's different than 2 years prior. And what Kelly taught me was another really profound lesson is to not dismiss the mundane. So, for example, in this piece, those big white blobs, for lack of a better word, right? Those are those big glass baubles that, till recently you could buy at Michael's. And how she cuts it up and manipulates it, and she turns really very simple materials into something really extraordinary, the foot of the plate of the dish. So in any event, that was a huge learning from Miss Knickerbocker. And so, as a consequence, the pieces I'm showing you are consequences of learning with certain people. So, Kelly opened up a world to me and taught me tricks that I hadn't known about. So, this piece, a little trick, you can't see it so well except for up here. Yeah, I have a bad habit of just grabbing a piece of whatever and start building a mosaic on it because that just feels right to do. And then I'll be done with that substrate. I have filled it all up and it's like, yeah, but this feels incomplete. This needs something else. And that's where the Laura Redland thing would come back and haunt me. So this is basically the original mosaic. And then after a few weeks, I glued it onto another board and made more mud and completed my lines and completed the composition in a different way until I was happy with it. Gila Rayberg. So I think many of us always want to try PKSCM and the broken dish. And who doesn't have too many broken dishes in their lives at this point as we're all downsizing and our parents are downsizing. So I really wanted to understand that and invited Gila to come and be a visiting artist. And so the picture on the left, I now own because she brought this as a workshop sample and it's like, yeah, you're not taking this back. Because that picture is every one of my mother's friends in Florida when my mother retired to Florida. And it's just a brilliant composition. Gilly uses the materials in really interesting ways. She too, the foot of the plate, right? On the finger, the neck. And so a lesson learned from Gila, she came to mosaics relatively late in life, but she was really, really interested in portraiture. And I think to this day, she's in a portrait drawing club where they draw portraits of their friends and their families and each other. And those drawing skills and those painting skills become a really important part of how she approaches mosaic. So she's just awesome. And so after my mother died, I made this on my own without Gila, but for sure learned so many wonderful tricks from Gila, like using the edge of the plate for her glasses. So obviously this was a hugely cathartic piece. So I also learned from Sherry Warner Hunter, the Queen of Concrete, because I was really interested for a while in making big stuff. And I did have some really big commissions that the artwork was physically large. And in large part, no pun intended, because of Sherry. This was the first really large scale sculptural commission that I had. And the truth be told, I hired Sherry and she made from a maquette I sent her the form and then her husband drove it to my house and then I finished all the mosaic on it along with Ali Mursky, who is my partner on this. I sure learned about Ottomento and gradations from Marion Shapiro in Australia. This is one of my favorite pieces. When I talked to Marion about this, she says, yeah, like I hated that piece. I was never even going to use the picture. And it's probably one of the most used pictures that Marion ever did. It's a really old piece, but it speaks to how we can make colors work for us and how beautiful gradations make for a piece. And this came into play. It's come into play on many pieces I've done, but in particular, this large scale piece that I did for a community center, really awkward location. That's another story for another day. But how impactful and how beautiful gradations of color can make our pieces more interesting. Again, the universe intervened. I got to write these two books. And then this person intervened way early. This person, Kim Wozniak, I met at that conference in Philadelphia because it was the very first conference she had attended, and it was the very first time she was a vendor because she had just bought Woodshead Mosaic from Susan Jeffries. And Kim is really fun. She was just at my house last week. I'm still kind of recovering from that. We visit once a year. We always do something profound and interesting and exhausting during our time together. That's just the vortex who she is. What Kim reminds me of a lot of things is that we all have a voice and we should use it. She also is so technically skilled. I've probably learned more about the technical sides of mosaic making from her than anyone else. And so we, about 10 years ago, and I can't believe we're like celebrating our 20th anniversary, we decided that we would just try this idea of having YouTube videos. And Quite honestly, it was a hot mess for the first 5 years. Like we didn't know what we were doing. I came out of the television business. I was editing these myself. Now we actually have an editor that I hire. Um, but this was a really interesting universe intervening situation. And why did we want to do it? Because we really want people to have correct technical information and really be inspired and not intimidated by the art form. And so we've like over 100 videos. And what happens is that Kim in particular, not me so much, will get these notes like, how do I do this? How do I do that? And what we were finding that if we could show people, it was way better for them. And we weren't spending 45 minutes writing emails that might not have done the job anyway, because we all learn better when we can see it. So I urge you, if you don't know about Make a Mosaic YouTube channel, to please go there. And there's so many topics. We try and stay on top of it that it's not a hot mess, that you can see lots. So Kim and I have had some pretty astounding experiences together. We were two early artists to do the Olive Stack residency in Listowel, Ireland. And Kim actually took this picture of me on the beach in Dingle. Remember, Ireland is really beautiful because it's always raining. So sometimes I'll look at a picture and I just know that it'll make a fabulous mosaic. And so over time, I did make this mosaic, and yep, using all those tricks from all those other artists, I've really been blessed with knowing like you can layer on top, and there can be unconventional cutting, and you don't need to follow the European tradition, but boy, sometimes it has its place, like on this piece in the sky. So in any event, that's that story. So I learned a lot when I made that previous piece. And this was another photograph I saw that I just really love. So this is my grandchildren. And there's kind of a tradition in the house that my grandson always walks his little sister to bed at night and he reads her a book. It's really quite beautiful. And this is like 18 months ago. So they're still doing that. Like they're older now. So this is called Goodnight Little Sister, and it's a layer, it's a dimensional piece where I actually built up the walls and the architecture. It's a workshop I kind of developing in my head. I'm not there yet, but it's a really interesting technique. So I do a lot of teaching, and after, the whole COVID hot mess, I was forced to really master teaching online because of my Smithsonian classes, because they immediately went to online teaching, to streaming. The good news is that they taught other instructors how to do it, which was great. They also provided all kinds of technical support. So now, although I still teach at the Smithsonian and online classes for the Smithsonian, I have a number of workshops I teach on my own. And this was a piece this is the last piece, personal piece that I completed. And it was really hard because I like really difficult things. And it's Pablo. It's based on a self-portrait that Picasso did of himself. And I started this in a workshop about small t and about mixed media. And two things were really made me attracted to wanting to do this. One, I was so interested in those lines, right? Because the Italian tradition is always talking to us about the line being supreme in mosaic. Okay, I wanted to honor that in my own way. The other thing is I had that Marseilles shale, right? So that's from Rachel Sager, Western Pennsylvania. I got this thing for Pennsylvania. And I knew it would be really fabulous hair. And so I struggled through this. This took me way longer than I ever imagined. I was on a campaign to not buy anything, but we all know that doesn't always go so well, because I did end up having to buy more small tea to get those really hot colors. And then, of course, I finished Picasso, and what do I notice? Oh, it's too small. It's an incomplete composition. And so a friend recently gave me a bunch of supplies, and I was going through those supplies, and I found like 5 bags of Marseilles shale for Rachel Sagers. And it was like, oh, but I didn't have to buy it. And I did the trick of expanding the piece. I put Pablo in the middle and long pieces of stained glass on the ribbon edge, and did this Marseilles shale and some this is just some Filati to give it a little more interest. And so anyway, it's a piece that I just am totally in love with. It's hanging in my kitchen right now, so I can see it every day. So the Hacienda Mosaico was an extraordinary experience for so many reasons. I loved being in Mexico for a week or two when it's snowing where I live, but the Hacienda was sold. And so I had a number of installations there that were constructed in a way that I could relocate them. And that's a big thing that I do in general when I build large scale mosaics, is I really try to do them in a way that they can be relocated should that day come, because that day comes a lot more than I think people want to admit. So this is an iguana, a little inappropriate in Northern Virginia, but I don't care. He lives on my shed, and this is shortly after relocating him from Mexico. I also relocated this dog because once I had grandchildren, it's like, oh yeah, this dog just belongs in my backyard because it's hilarious. And these were frogs that I had made. My mother, for whatever reason, loved frogs. And so these I had made also in Mexico with my classes, and I was easily able to relocate them. They're not so large. So the universe intervening, right? And so, in addition to the YouTube channel, have spun off some other teaching that are pre-recorded classes. One of the things I felt a void about was really good instruction being given in mosaics, and wanting to aid people in that, because I see online sometimes just incorrect information, and I don't want to correct anyone in public because I don't want to, because that's just wrong to do. But I want to offer to people who are teaching mosaics, particularly people just starting out. Like, I fell in love with mosaics and was determined I was going to have a school, and I hardly knew anything, but I hired people to help me to come and teach. So in any event, this is I do a lot of workshops, and this is where the Maverick Mosaics web shop is where you can learn about all things that I teach. Um, the other thing that happened, the universe intervened about 15 years ago when I was in a yoga class, and this really nice man came up to me after a hot yoga class. I mean, and you are really a mess after a hot yoga class. And he introduced himself and said, yeah, my name is Renee, and I organize international field trips for schools. And I understand that you have a school, and gee, maybe we should talk. And so I've known Renee for about 12 years also, and he's taken me all over Europe. I've done something like 12 trips with him, and he doesn't go on the trips. It's amazing. I tell him what I want to do and where I want to take a group, and then he figures it out, and I tell him the high points, and he works out all of the logistics, and then I take group places. So this is a group we were doing parts of Italy and Slovenia. And did you know that the Spielenbergo School is only like an hour and a half from the country of Slovenia? So we were there. The picture on the left, um, about the same time the Smithsonian, when I was teaching there, then they also were starting to ask me if I would be willing to do tours. And I actually did do a tour to Philadelphia, but then I bought a group of people from the Smithsonian. 45 of my closest friends were the tour minimums on that. But we also did many sites in Washington, D.C. The picture on the left is one of the tours I was doing in D.C. We stopped doing, I stopped doing tours for the Smithsonian because the security perimeters have become impossible to work around. And that was still like when Obama was president. The traffic and the ability to get in and out of places really have made it impossible to take groups. So I'm sorry about that. So I continue to share all these experiences. I again travel, I think fundamentally changes who we are. So I have partnered for the last little while, and I'm about to do this year our third workshop in Barcelona at a studio there with a Catalan artist. So this is a painting that I own. And this painting is by Jesse Reno. This was a gift that the owner of the Hacienda Mosaico gave to me, and I shipped it home. And it's one of my very favorite possessions. And I don't always understand abstract art, but I'm really trying to. And I've always been really super attracted to Jesse Reno's work. He was all over the hacienda, but who he is as a person, he's introduced me to some really interesting things about education and art making. And the title of this is Become Purpose. And so that's really important to me. And sometimes I have just had to have a job because I have a mortgage. And so sometimes we do things because we have to versus because they fully feel fulfilling. So I keep thinking back to, other artwork that I made, like those little creatures. So I periodically do artwork with these little creatures. This is a piece that I put out every time there's an election because it's called Plan Your Vote, right? We have to plan our vote. And a part of these little creatures is understanding the concept is that we're all the same. Like, we all bleed red. We're all chasing the same things in life fundamentally: security, that our family's happy, that sort of thing. So this is, and the quote is an Obama quote, don't let them take your power, don't let them take away our democracy. This piece I made at the beginning of COVID because we were all stuck, right? And it was just a piece that I felt I needed to make. And this is another COVID piece, right? Because COVID was way longer than any of us ever expected. And this is called A Shot of Hope because it is my belief, and it's still my belief. It was my belief at the time that the only way we were going to get out of COVID was with vaccines. So that's just my position on that. So this is my homage to that. And again, the universe intervened 37 years ago. This is my husband, Ken. He goes on many adventures with me or just helps me pay for other adventures. And so I really couldn't do what I've been able to do without his support. And so, I'm changing my logo so that it's more about me. So until next time, this is where you can find me. Now, just a little bit more. So this all started. So when Elise and I first started talking, the idea was that I was going to introduce the concept of contemporary mosaic art too, and the difference between it and Sama. Be clear, Sama changed my life. And this is not a competition. We're all chasing the same thing, right? You guys are meeting and wanting support and community and places to show your work and get ideas. And so CMA2, because CMA1 did exist and it closed, happened during COVID. And so Pam Gibbons was the original founder, and what's happened in the last few years is now it's a not-for-profit. Pam has retired. The president is now someone else, is Dawn Mendelson. But they've had a couple of conferences, and early 2024, there was a conference in Eugene, Oregon. It was attended by about 150 people, a community project, speakers, all kinds of great stuff. And so I just want to tell you a little bit about the organization because it's an online organization mostly. That's their push, right? And so this is they just did a big general meeting, and these are slides that Dawn gave to me that were part of that general meeting. So some of you may have seen this. So Shine On is by Paul Perry, who is Australian. So the whole goal and the vision for CMA2 is to create an exciting mosaic community that everyone is welcome, whatever they're chasing within the mosaic medium. And so there's both structured and spontaneous interaction. It's a very vibrant website. There's countless educational experience available to members. And there's exhibitions and there's talks that you can attend. They're all of their, not all, but the majority of their talks are recorded. So if you can't make the scheduled time, you can watch the recordings. It's a really incredible resource. There's so in 2024, there were like 46 different events hosted. There were 5 different artist interviews. They have really interesting interviews where you get to learn about artists that you might not know otherwise, and many times because they're just not in your organization or they're not Americans. There were 3 exhibitions, and there was one awesome conference. So really nice bead mosaic. So at the time of the general meeting, there was 1,219 members. I think now there's closer to 1,500 members. 260 of those are international members, and 365 people claim to be instructors. So that's really a lot of possible learning for folks. The conference was really amazing. Eugene was really an interesting place to be. And so John Solinger, who never allows his photo to be taken, he and Pam had really partnered on pulling this together with a lot of volunteers. And so it's an all volunteer organization, and there is no membership fee. And I'm not on the board, so I don't necessarily agree with that because sometimes I feel like you need a fee, but their position is that they just don't want to do that. So they rely on donations, and they have over 400 people volunteering at the point of this meeting that went on. And so just a lot of interesting things going on. So at the time of the meeting, I was on the scholarship and conference committees. I have resigned from scholarship. There is an active scholarship. Actually, the application just went out for, I think, on Friday. And the reason I resigned from that committee is because it was 2 other women we are going to co-chair a 2026 conference that's going to happen in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And this has not been widely announced or promoted. The save the date will go out on February 15th. So, but I just wanted to share with you that that was where I am with that organization at this point in time. So just know that this will be a really fabulous and interesting opportunity, and it will be in early March of 2026. So anyway, yep, Albuquerque. It's really quite interesting. We are working with a group called the Groove Art Space, which is hosting a Mosaic Month in Albuquerque as a part of this. They also have done a lot of work. There's a lot of organizations that work with the underserved, particularly art organizations, and one group in particular that does mosaics and hand-built ceramic for mosaic with young people. So I'm really excited about it. I think it'll be a really fabulous, not just conference, but experience. And everything is like walkable and in the same neighborhood. So that's kind of cool. So anyway, this is our final picture from, and there was AJ. This was his first conference. He was really happy to be there. His aunt paid his registration fee because she just knew in her heart it was the right thing to do. So anyway, so thank you for having me. That's kind of my story and my story of where I am these days. So I'm happy to answer any questions or comments or whatever you got.
Okay, well, I've been following along in the messages, and everybody has, well, not everybody, but so first of all, we want to thank you very much for your wonderful retrospective of your career and all the inspiration that you have. A couple people commented on how wonderful it was that your school offered a degree in monumental sculpture, and what a cool major that was.
But it really wasn't a
Uh,
major. It was that you could major in anything. So I just
oh,
kind of made it up. And
well, that is
that's
really
okay,
neat.
right? Yeah.
Um, and people are thanking you for sharing with us the origin of your gifts. The window that you'd shown that's in your sister-in-law's house, was that a stained glass window or
Uh,
a head?
they had determined this shape, right? So it's a half circle. And so when they had the house built, they had, I don't remember the thickness, they had tempered glass put in that. And then I built the mosaic on a separate piece of tempered glass that I'm pretty sure was at least a half-inch thick so that there would never be any flex to it. And then we installed that mosaic. So I grouted it completely flat in the garage, and then the builder installed it into that space. So we had basically pre-fit the two glasses against each other.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. Um, did you, someone wanted to know, do you use photos or drawings um, as inspiration for your work?
All of it. Like I said, like some of those photos, sometimes I'll see a photo like the one of my grandchildren and say, yeah, that would be a really interesting piece. Sometimes, but I'm going to take that photo and turn it into a contour line drawing almost always. So sometimes I'm just going to that, to that coloring book or to stained glass patterns, or I'll see some other drawing that's appropriate because when I do a piece, I'm reducing it to a line drawing.
Um, someone was interested in your the layered landscape that you had shown us,
Mhm.
and they wanted to know if that was grouted.
Oh, great question. So if the one I did with Laura Redlin, which was Giverny, the lake, that was colored thin set. It was not grouted. But the one of me on the beach in Ireland, the bottom layer was grouted. And then the person I actually built on epoxy sculpt. So that was like an individual little unit that I could then adhere on top. There's some tricks to it, but the bottom line is it's adhered on top. And then all the flowers came after grouting because I didn't grout the flowers.
Okay, so basically you use a combination of techniques
Yeah.
depending upon what you're doing.
Mhm.
What adhesive works best for Laurel style of glass layering?
Again, kind of depends on the piece. So I do two different kind of layering techniques. So those interior pieces, a lot of times I'm just using well bond or maybe silicone, again, kind of case by case. Sometimes epoxy sculpt. If it's exterior, I build the individual layers, like that iguana, the head and the legs, part of it are a layer. I build them as separate units on whatever the appropriate lightweight substrate is. In that case, it was probably Weddy board. And then I build those layers. So it depends on if it's inside or outside, because outside we have to use thin set.
One of the questions that multiple people have put into the chat is how do you get started with CMA2? What would the best way
Oh,
for someone who
I am
doesn't
going
know
to
anything
pass
about it do?
on to everybody. It's really easy. It's a invitational link. And the reason for the invitation, and there's a very, very minor vetting process, is it's just to keep salespeople out. So it's basically, if you say, "Oh, I heard about you," or "I'm a member of MSOP," and you're in, and that's how we get in. And then there's,
Okay.
there's member responsibilities, and one of the responsibilities is that, yeah, I promise I will do a little bit of a profile about myself, and that I will not just lurk, but I'll ask questions or I'll look at something, and so to keep that energy happening. So that's how that works.
Okay. Thank you. We appreciate that. So thank you so much, Bonnie. This has been
My
wonderful.
pleasure.